Have you ever wondered why you eat less, exercise more, and still don't lose weight? And then everyone tells you, including your doctor, that you should eat less calories. But what if calories are not what you should pay attention to? What if the type of food and the time of day of eating determines whether you save fat or burn fat? Hello, health champions. Today we are talking about the insulin trick number 1, which helps you lose weight. And if you listen carefully and really understand what we are talking about here today, this will probably completely change the way you think about weight loss. And everywhere people talk about calories, you have to reduce calories, even your doctor says that. But the thing is, calories do play a role. Somehow, but not as you think. Yes, you don't want to eat 20,000 calories a day, but they are not the most important thing. They only play a role when they come from foods that increase the insulin level too much. So we have to understand that calories play a role to a certain extent, but insulin is the key to what you have to pay attention to, not the calories. And where is the proof? Well, let me give you 2 proofs. The first is when you carry out an experiment and put fat cells in a petri dish. Put them in a nutrient medium where they are pleasant. Have an environment and then feed them. You put all your favorite foods around them so that they swim in all your favorite foods, as similar as it would be in the body. You add glucose and fatty acids that you love. So if your body cells, which would be in the petri dish, were surrounded by glucose and fatty acids and you loved it, you would think that you would swallow it and get big and fat. But what is the result here in the petri dish? Well, instead you have tiny, thin, small, worrisome fat cells, because what is missing is that you can't start anything with all the food without insulin. No insulin and you have hungry cells. Okay, so what would happen if you added insulin to the petri dish? Well, you guessed it. You get big, swollen fat cells. And not only that, you get them within hours. The point is, of course, that it's not really about calories, because the fat cells in the petri dish had all the calories they wanted, but nothing happened without insulin. The second proof comes from the understanding of type 1 diabetes. There are 10 million people worldwide with type 1 diabetes. We know exactly how that works. If a type 1 diabetic does not have insulin, if he is a fully developed type 1 and we do not administer insulin, he actually starves. That's what happened to type 1 diabetics. Before we had insulin, before you had the ability to extract or synthesize insulin. And that's why it's called juvenile diabetes, because the children got it at a young age and only lived at most a few years while the disease went into its fully developed stage. And they starved, no matter how much food they had. They could stuff themselves with an endless buffet and would still starve if they didn't have insulin. And we also have the proof of type 1 diabetics who do not take enough insulin, whether by accident or on purpose. If you take very, very little insulin, you don't have to be at 0 insulin. But if you only take very little and not enough, then they lose weight and become very, very thin. Because it is also possible to become overweight as a type 1 diabetic. If you eat low-quality processed modern foods with a lot of sugar, starch, seed oils and all the things that make insulin resistant, and you eat a lot of it and just take additional insulin, then you can become insulin resistant and obese, although you are a type 1 diabetic. So if you belong to it, or just want to lose a few pounds and are a type 1 diabetic and think, wow, that sounds like a good idea, then think about it again. Don't even think about it. Because what will happen is, if you take too little insulin, you get hyperglycemia, your blood sugar shoots through the ceiling, and your glucose is excreted through the kidneys, which is called glucosuria. Even worse is that you get a ketoacidosis. If you have a lot of blood sugar that is in the bloodstream and not in the cells starve. They then start to remove the little fat they still have and produce ketones. With high blood sugar and very high ketones and without insulin, you develop a life-threatening condition called ketoacidosis, which has nothing to do with the ketogenic diet. This is a very serious condition that only occurs if you don't have insulin. So don't even think about it, because you would probably end up as a very thin corpse. There are no shortcuts to health. You have to help your body find its balance. Insulin is the gatekeeper. Here are a few things that insulin does when it comes out of balance. Insulin promotes lipogenesis, which means that excess food is converted into fat. This is good because when we grow up in a world of deficiency like all other animals on the planet, and what the reality was for the people, as long as we have it, except maybe in the last few hundred years, then it is good that excess food becomes too fat, because it helps us to stock up on supplies and survive. But if there is excess food, and we don't learn to eat the right foods, we get excess insulin, excessive food storage, and become fat-laden. Now another function of insulin becomes a problem, because in a world of deficiency it is good. We store fat and can then build it off. This is the case when insulin is in balance. However, if insulin is present in excess, lipolysis prevents the building of fat. We want to build off this fat to regain the stored energy, but with a high insulin level, we can't do that. The energy is therefore stuck in the fat depots of our body, and instead we get hungry and eat more, and we release more insulin and we store more fat. And so it goes on and on. We have to control insulin and learn to do this through our lifestyle. There is no shortcut. There is no quick solution. We can't just take a pill or try to change a variable, because a change always influences something else, unless we do it in such a way that it supports the body and creates a general balance. There is the morning redness phenomenon, which is very well known, but also very ignored, underrated and misunderstood in relation to its connection with our actions. The morning redness phenomenon means that the body releases more hormones in the early morning hours before waking up. This happens to prepare us for waking up and for the start of the day. These hormones are cortisol, human growth hormone, adrenaline and glucagon. And what they do is they help to generate energy when we have nothing to eat at the moment. And all four together increase the gluconeogenesis, which means to break down glycogen and make glucose out of it. So that increases blood sugar. It also increases lipolysis, the breakdown of fat, and its conversion into energy. Adrenaline has a slightly different role. It pushes up, increases vigilance, and helps the body to improve its energy consumption. What happens now is that every time the body does something, or for whatever reason, the blood sugar rises again. As we learned from type 1 diabetics, blood sugar is of no use to us when it is in the bloodstream instead of in the cell. This means that since all these things increase blood sugar, we will now indirectly increase insulin. And it's not as dramatic as when we eat a meal, but it's significant and it's enough to get us going. But what that means is that we are actually a little more insulin resistant in the morning. With all this knowledge, I have a question for you. Does it still sound to you as if breakfast is the most important meal of the day? And then, let's talk about why there is such a thing as the morning red phenomenon. Why does it even exist? The answer is, it is part of an adaptation that has been going on for as long as there are people on the planet. Whether you believe it's a few thousand or millions of years doesn't matter, because it's the same idea, and if you understand it, you can use it. Our prehistoric ancestors had no refrigerators, and hardly any food that they could store in a dining room, because everything went bad quickly. Most of the time, food was scarce, and they had to get up in the morning and get moving. They had to collect food or do something before they could eat. The morning red phenomenon is there. All these hormones prepare you to wake up and provide energy to find food before you can eat. And the meaning of this is that you are biologically determined to be ready to move when you wake up, instead of eating. Does it still sound to you as if breakfast is the most important meal of the day? So this insulin trick consists of a few parts. The first part is that you, with the knowledge of the morning red phenomenon, shift your breakfast by at least 2 hours. There is nothing wrong with shifting the first meal by 5 hours or more. Waking up and having your first meal at noon is, on the contrary, an excellent idea. Intermittent fasting, where you eat fewer meals in a shorter time. For example, having your first meal at noon and the last one at 6 o'clock. By waiting at least 2 hours, you allow a natural decline. This dawn phenomenon, hormones, while they decline and you start the day, you also allow your glucose and your insulin to decline, so that you are insulin sensitive before you eat. In the meantime, you can get up, concentrate, plan your day, do your chores if you like, and when you eat, you concentrate on fat and protein, so that you don't interrupt this good run. And as simple as this little change is, it still allows you to bring the timing more in tune with your DNA. Part 2 of this insulin trick is to sleep more and to reduce stress. This has to do with cortisol. First of all, stress is obviously something that cortisol produces. There is a sympathetic reaction when you are stressed, and your heart rate rises, your blood flow increases, your breathing frequency increases, your muscle tension increases, and this happens within seconds. That's the neurological part, but then the cortisol sets in, and that's the biochemical part. If this stress reaction lasts longer than a few seconds, the body will try to increase the blood sugar through this cortisol. But less sleep, bad sleep, or insufficient sleep have almost the same effect. And in fact, bad sleep can increase your cortisol by 2 to 3 times. Bad sleep is like a lot of stress, already at the beginning of the day. And again, the main task of cortisol is to increase blood sugar. And as a result, insulin is also increased. And of course you can imagine what that would do to have the dawn phenomenon and to be insulin resistant in addition to bad sleep. That's not a good mix. It makes you hungrier, less full when you eat, and it gives you more appetite, especially for carbohydrates. So what your body is looking for is the right food at the right time, as discussed, but also enough sleep at the right time. 8 hours is not enough. It works much better when it is tuned to the light-dark cycle of the day. Part 3 of the insulin trick: stabilize blood sugar. This can vary for different people, but a good guideline, a rule of thumb is, your sobering value should be around 85. After eating, it should not rise much. It should probably stay below 105. And if you fast a lot, do keto, fast longer, it is perfectly fine if this sober blood sugar is lower or even much lower. To stabilize blood sugar, change your lifestyle. Focus on healthy fats and proteins as a basis. Then add plenty of fiber-rich vegetables, leafy vegetables and strong, poor vegetables. And possibly legumes, if you are not extremely insulin resistant and tolerate a certain amount of carbohydrates. Just as important, reduce or eliminate sugar, starch, and processed foods, which are mostly based on starch and sugar. Why is it so important for this insulin trick to stabilize blood sugar? Because if you tend to have blood sugar fluctuations, this roller coaster ride where he sags after a few hours without eating, that can happen at night. So if you have unstable blood sugar and it drops at night, this triggers a cortisol rise. And this cortisol will increase blood sugar and of course trigger a little more insulin. But the greater effect that this rise, this fall will have in the middle of the night is that cortisol will block melatonin, your sleep hormone, which means that you will wake up now, your sleep will be interrupted or disturbed. You will not get this healthy, deep sleep that your body is looking for. Do you remember the previous slide? Bad sleep again? Increase cortisol, so we only strengthen this vicious circle. Here is part 4 of this insulin trick. This is something that I often heard people talk about, and I quoted it wrong, strongly misrepresented, seen in another video. It is the coffee pot and the coffee truth. We will go through some scenarios. So first we know that there is this thing in the morning, which is also called the dawn phenomenon. And because of this dawn phenomenon, blood sugar increases, and that's why we get an insulin rise. We get an increase in insulin in the morning, and we are a little more insulin resistant. If we combine this with a carbohydrate breakfast, we get a dramatically higher insulin rise. But there is a third scenario that many do not know, but many who heard about it are very confused or are misled, and that is that we have a higher insulin level in the morning. If we eat carbohydrates now, it will be much higher. But if we add coffee or caffeine to these 2 other variables, then we get an even higher rise. And that is a fact. This happens because caffeine is like adrenaline. It will ignite this stress reaction, additionally heat up the dawn mechanism. But here's the part where most people get confused. You've heard that? You've heard about the dawn phenomenon. You've heard about carbohydrates. You've heard about coffee. And now everything you hear is that you shouldn't drink coffee in the morning. Because you think you heard that with coffee in the morning, and with breakfast, you somehow overlook this part.
So you think that coffee causes it in the morning? Yes, there is something true about it, but it is rather that it only adds something to the matter. It only slightly increases this insulin reaction in some people. Not so much if you are insulin sensitive, because then your body is better at regulating that. So if you are insulin sensitive, What does it mean?
Your pure insulin is low, you have good blood sugar control, then don't worry, drink your coffee, because even if it lets you rise by a few %, it won't be a problem for you. On the other hand, if you are insulin resistant, then this is still not the end of the world, but it would probably be a good idea to wait about 90 minutes so that these hormones can drop a little in the morning, so that the effect of this caffeine increase is less. But here is the point that you have to understand, whether you are insulin sensitive or insulin resistant, that if you don't eat anything, if you just wake up and drink your coffee, then there is nothing to save. Even if your insulin would rise a little, there is nothing to save, so it's not a big problem. And that's why you never want to compare the number 4 here with just coffee in the morning and put it in the same category as 2 or 3, where you actually eat something. Here are my suggestions for the insulin trick. Don't fight against your hormones. Learn how they work and work with them. Breakfast is not the most important thing. Meal of the day. Fasting breaking simply means the food you eat after a fast. It doesn't have to be in the morning. I would suggest you wait about 2 hours. Or if you do intermittent fasting, a time-limited meal window, then we wait until lunch. I would suggest you put coffee or significant caffeine on for about 90 minutes, especially if you are insulin resistant. It will also be helpful if you move a little. It doesn't have to be an exhausting sport, but just a little movement. Before you eat, if you, let's say, wait your 2 hours, if you move at all before that, this movement will help you to use some of this energy that is generated by the dawn phenomenon. Remember, it is there to help you to get up and move. If you move, you use it and you fulfill the purpose of this dawn reaction. When you eat, focus on fat and protein. Prioritize sleep. Sleep not just a few hours when it occurs. Recognize its advantages for metabolism, brain, health, inner peace, balance, your nervous system, and your overall well-being. Take it seriously. If possible, 3 to 4 hours between last meal and bedtime is ideal, so that you don't go to bed with a full stomach. Your body had time to process the meal. An important part of a healthy lifestyle is a low-carbohydrate, a diet with full-fledged foods. If you only do that, you will avoid the risk of virtually all modern degenerative diseases. You will drastically reduce it. If you liked this video, you will love it. If you want to master health by understanding how the body works, subscribe. Press the bell and activate all notifications so that you never miss a life-saving video.